Hello and welcome to Within the Frame, coming to you live from Seoul. I'm Han Da-eun. There's a new source of friction between South Korea and Japan. The feud between South Korea's largest portal, Naver, and Japan's LineYahoo has unsettled much of Korea, with a rare intervention of the Japanese government stoking various speculations on why it's pressuring Naver to cut its control of Line, the operator of Japan's dominant messenger app. The row has come to a halt, at least for now, but with a high possibility of being reignited at any time. Could Korea's Naver lose control of Line to Japan? On this edition of Within the Frame, we look into the complex business dynamics between involved parties, the settlement prospects, and possible motives behind the Japanese government's unusual intervention. To help us navigate through the key contentious issues, we have Professor Kim Yong-Jin at Sogang Business School joining us virtually. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening.
Also with us tonight is Professor Kim Yong-Jin at Texas A&M University's Mays Business School. It's great to have you back.
Thank you for the invite.
All right, Professor Yong-Jin, let's start with you. For our viewers who may not be familiar with the dispute, could you first give us a clear picture of what exactly is happening? Who's involved, who's fighting against who, and how did this all begin?
Yeah, basically it is a very rare case, when Japanese government just jumped into the contract between the companies. But before we discuss the dispute between Naver and SoftBank and Japanese government, let me shortly brief about the history of LineYahoo. LineYahoo was set up in 2019 as a result of a merger between Japan's leading messenger service Line and the largest search platform Yahoo Japan. The chairman of SoftBank, Masayoshi Son, initiated this merger to establish an online business platform that offers search, shopping, messaging, and mobile payment services. This merger resulted in a giant platform company, LineYahoo, that has user base of over 100 million people, which surpassed the size of global tech giants such as Google and Amazon in Japan. After the merger, LineYahoo has been expanding its business and growing steadily in terms of revenue and profit. LineYahoo, has expanded its user base beyond Japan, and currently it has over 200 million users in Taiwan, Thailand, and Indonesia. The majority of LineYahoo's technology originated from Naver, which is a South Korean company. Everybody knows, right? Recently, the Japanese government pressured Naver to sell its shares in LineYahoo, of course, of which shares are owned by Naver and SoftBank 50-50 structure through A Holdings. There are some fact and some argument in the dispute. In terms of fact, there had been a hacking incident that occurred in November 2023 and resulted in the leakage of 510,000 personal information, and there has been some conflict between Naver and SoftBank over management of the company. After the security breach, which did not look as severe as a similar incident in the past, the Japanese government suddenly attempt to force LineYahoo to sell off Naver's share to SoftBank. This action of the Japanese government has been regarded as an act of betrayal by Korean people due to three facts. First of all, this action violates the treaty between Korea and Japan, which protect investment in each country. And second, LineYahoo sets up its own system so that it won't depend on Naver's system anymore, which get rid of the reason to sell off Naver's share in LineYahoo. Finally, the past growth of LineYahoo has been heavily backed by Naver technology. So Korean people kind of suspicious about Japanese government action.
Thank you for that brief history, explanation of the brief history behind LineYahoo, because that part is also very important. So the dispute can be quite confusing because we have several companies involved, but to put it in simple terms, Naver and SoftBank equally owns A Holdings, the parent company of LineYahoo Corporation that runs a social media app that dominates digital life in Japan. And the Japanese government is now pressuring Naver to cut its control over Line, citing Naver's information security concerns. Now, Dr. Hwa-gyun, some are comparing the Japanese government's intervention to the U.S. government's push to ban China-based short video company TikTok. How are the two cases similar and how do they differ?
Well, both cases involve significant government intervention in tech disputes, obviously. So I think that's the main similarity. In case of TikTok, however, the US government cited national security concerns, particularly the risk of Chinese government access to American user data through TikTok, and also the constant monitoring as the Chinese government actually does to their own people in China. So I think that's the main concern, which I think has some legitimate the background, I think. On the other hand, the Japanese government actions against the Naver, although it claims something similar, such as this information security breach, as Professor Kim mentioned, but the main motivation seems to be to claim control over significant tech assets and IT infrastructure and platform, which actually Japan is somewhat lacking, I think, relatively speaking. Therefore, the TikTok case is more about purely, almost purely, I think, about the national security concerns, while the Naver SoftBank case, I think, is more about like control fight between two firms. Now the government is kind of the middling in to just to basically give some favor to a domestic firm over the foreign firm. So I think that's the main difference.
So they are similar in a way, but the main difference is that the TikTok case, U.S. push to ban TikTok in the country, is mainly due to security concerns, whereas in Japan, what's happening right now between the Naver and LineYahoo dispute is focused on fighting for the management right control. Now,
exactly.
Professor Yong-Jin, zooming in on the key points of contention, the big question is whether Naver will be pressured to sell LineYahoo's stake and how much. How do you anticipate things to unfold?
Well, let's first, listen to what Naver says. According to Naver, they're open to all possibilities, including the sale of their share, and in discussion with probably Japanese partners, SoftBank, and Japanese government to create the best outcome for the company. Based on this statement, we can guess Naver's real interest. Naver seems to resolve the concerns of Japanese government to make sure its other businesses in Japan and Southeast Asia are not affected by its decisions. So Naver may hand over a part of its stake to SoftBank and become the second largest shareholder. But the problem is how much, as you asked. Under the current 50-50 structure, SoftBank would only need to receive a single share from Naver to become the largest shareholder, but it is reportedly wants to secure 2/3 of the voting shares in order to change the articles of the incorporation. To do so, the SoftBank would need to take over at least 15% from Naver. Okay, the sale of all shares Naver has, which was originally discussed, is unlikely. Naver's stake in LineYahoo is estimated to be worth around 10 trillion won, maybe $1 billion, including a management premium, which is huge money for SoftBank to buy all of them. So to conclude, Naver won't sell its entire stake because it wants to protect other businesses like, Line Manga and Naver Z outside of Japan, such as Taiwan and Thailand. So it will stay with LineYahu as the second largest shareholder by selling, some amount of stake to 10 to 15% to SoftBank.
And Professor Ha-gyun, we also want to get your projection on Naver's possible next moves.
Well, given the situation, if the block deal is going to be under the discussion, typically the block deals are much more illiquid, and therefore typically the price per share is somewhat lower than the market price. But in this case, it's a bit different because, as we know, this platform business is known to be very lucrative over time. Therefore, the projection value over future, I think, is actually quite high. Compared to similar, the firms providing this kind of services, I think the Yahoo actually share price is pretty low. And also because Japan's the stock market has been somewhat slumping, therefore the Naver is not going to just lowball this actually offer, and they're not going to sell this. Having said that, I think if we actually somewhat think about like the previous episodes, it's a totally different context, but I think the Renault versus Nissan case, I believe that it was around like 2018, late 2018, that Carlos Ghosn at that time, the then CEO, got arrested in Japan and then fled. And I think since then both countries, the firms have been dealing with this kind of corporate divorce. It's not yet done yet. So over like 5 years, 6 years, still it's ongoing. Therefore, even if this is going to happen, it's going to take so long, and the projections and also the valuation is going to be all over the place. So it's not going to be as simple as it sounds. And clearly the current, the amount that people talk about, like this 10 trillion one, I think that's too small.
Well, we're hearing various scenarios. Some say that Naver may sell stake as management rights were technically held by SoftBank anyway, and this judging from the composition of board members, and that Naver may take home up to 10 trillion won for handing over the management rights, as Professor Yong-Jin pointed out. But of course, it's not that simple, and there are contrasting analyses as well, so we'll see how things play out. Now, Professor Yong-Jin, SoftBank Japan announced earlier this month its intention to purchase Naver's shares in LineYahu, of course, the joint venture between the two companies. And some speculate that the Japanese government has influenced SoftBank, aiming to boost Japan's relatively weak IT industry through the tech investment giant. What's your take?
Yes, I think, it's very, very likely. The action of the Japanese government indicate two things to me. First of all, Japanese government wants to limit the power of Korean platforms in Japan due to the increasing popularity of Korean platforms such as Naver and Kakao's webtoon services and LineYahu in Japan. The Japanese government tried to use a minor issue just like this, right, the security breach, as an excuse to curb Naver to seize its services and depart, from the Japan. This is my guess, okay? Secondly, Japanese government want to invest huge budget into AI industry, including AI chip, software. And SoftBank chairman Masayoshi Son also follows this line of the Japanese government policy. I think, Japanese government may keep in mind their past failure in memory chip business. In the memory chip business in the past, Japanese companies led the world market once, and later on to hand it over to Korean companies. So this time they don't want to repeat that failure. Recently, there is a huge competition among countries and companies to secure initiative in the AI industry because it is believed to the AIs reshape the economies and determine competitiveness of companies as well as countries. So it is very likely, that due to that strategy, Japanese government is forcing Naver to sell off their shares to SoftBank.
Well, the fact that the Line messaging app is used by over 80% of internet users alone, the 100 million user base, as you pointed out, can be quite intimidating to Japan, prompting the government to keep South Korea's neighbor in check. But can its intervention be justified is the big question. And some point out that this could negatively impact Japan. Dr. Hwa-gyun, they say that Naver-Line feud could undermine Japan's efforts to attract more foreign investment in companies, as it'll set a bad precedent of strict government regulation. What's your take on this?
I think I agree with that point, and the pressure on Naver to sell its stakes in Lainyahu could indeed set a concerning precedent for Japan's efforts to attract foreign investments and other things. Especially nowadays, Japanese yen has been dropping, so I don't think this is a good time for Japan to lose further their reputation, I think. And if Japan is seen as unwelcoming or kind of overly interventionist type of government, then it could deter, obviously, other foreign companies also from entering the business, I think, in the future. I think Japan probably wants to learn a bit from the Chinese, the experience. China actually invited a lot of foreign firms, and they've been getting lots of technology transfer and all those kind of good things. But we now see actually that many firms are exiting, and I think I saw some of the Wall Street Journal articles or Economist articles talking about the similar things. So clearly, the Western media and others are also showing big concerns over China. And also in case of Japan, from more financial side and foreign currency side, it's been like a very strong anchoring currency, as almost like a US dollar level. Now I think it's a bit unsettling. So if they just keep pushing this type of the interventionist approach, then in the future there's a chance that this Japanese yen actually may lose its the kind of strong stance as the anchoring currency. So I think overall it's probably a bad move. Although they probably will do it and then with some more calculated move, but overall this will have some negative impact.
Now, shifting focus to the Bank of Korea, where the last monetary policy meeting for the first half was held. Professor Yong-Jin, the central bank, kept its key rates unchanged while revising up Korea's growth forecast for this year from 2.1% to 2.5%. What factors are behind the bank's latest decision?
Well, as the pain of high interest rate, has continued for more than 2 years, everyone is waiting, to lower interest rate. However, sadly, today the Bank of Korea has decided to maintain the base interest rate at 3.5%, as you mentioned. This decision, marks the 11th consecutive time the rate has been held steady since last year, February. I guess, we should prepare for long period of high interest rate due to 2 reasons. The first is that the expectation for a cut in the U.S. benchmark interest rate, have significantly decreased. The U.S., Federal Reserve Board, which is the central bank of U.S., has frozen the base rate this year. The original prediction, that it will cut 3 times within this year has lost strength. This is due to the persistent inflation in the United States and booming retail market and low unemployment. I don't think, this situation would change shortly. So if, U.S. FRB would not, decrease lower the base interest rate, Bank of Korea cannot move the other way around. The second, I think, is a longer-term issue. So in Korea, we actually push or press the price so long time, like gas and electricity, all the utilities. So and also even international price went up. We pressed those, and the crude oil prices and gas prices due to the Russian-Ukraine war continues, and Israel-Palestine war continues. So we have still very, very uncertainty in the global prices and global political spheres. So the Korean, Bank of Korea may not cut the interest rate, soon. So, yeah, those are two basic reasons. Even though recently our export gets better, but still, our domestic economy is not getting better that much. So, anyway, the Bank of Korea, is in kind of very hard, situation to move around.
Well, so now a rate cut here in Korea seems more distant, and similar stories are being played out in the U.S. Professor Ha-gyun, the FOMC minutes were also unveiled, which indicated worries over lack of progress on inflation. Do you still expect the U.S. Fed to begin rate cuts within this year?
Probably once very toward the end of the year. But there's a chance that data look better in July or June meeting or September meeting. Then I think at least they'll try to signal it. And then once they signal it, then I think there's a chance that the long-term rate's gonna change also first based on the expectations. So effect may happen earlier, but in terms of actual rate cut, I think also based on the the markets, the Fed futures market and things like that, I think probably once a year toward the very end, like December meeting, maybe November meeting, I think.
So U.S. inflation figures were unexpectedly high, and we may see a longer path to rate cuts.
A little better, right?
But still, you expect at least one rate cut within this year. All right, we'll leave our discussion there for tonight. Thank you so much, Professor Ha-gyun and Yong-Jin, for your expertise and analysis.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much.
And that brings us to the end of this show. Thank you for watching, and be sure to tune in same time tomorrow to join our conversation. Goodbye for now.